Muchísimas gracias, Silvia.
Thank you so much for the very interesting lecture, Silvia. And now we're going to go to the roundtable moderated by Professor Mia Rodríguez Salgado. Will you please, panelists, come to the panel? We're going to present the main contribution of these 4 women for the artistic patronage. Good afternoon. It's going to be a very dense afternoon with a lot of material. I'm going to first introduce myself. I'm also a historian, but just a historian, full stop. I do not believe in the divisions between art history, political history, and so on. We are all, I hope, historians. And as we just heard, it is key to know quite a lot about politics if we want to understand art, and the other way around, because usually those of us who are more focused on politics tend to believe that those who are more focused on art are missing our political part. But I believe that we can learn from each other actually a lot. My name is Mia Rodríguez Salgado. I'm a professor of International History. I do have that title at the London School of Economics. And I'm also a member of the History faculty at Oxford University. Well, this round table, and it is going to be a round table, is going to have 4 experts who are going to talk about 4 different queens. The title is a very important thing. We're going to talk about arts, politics, and devotion at the service of the Austrian house. It is going to be slightly complicated, I believe, when it comes to coordinating contributions of all of you, members of the audience, and also, obviously, of hundreds of people who are listening to us online. But we're going to try to do so even after the presentations of each one of our panelists. They're going to have 20 minutes each, but then we're going to try to hold a debate. It is experimental, I believe, and I hope that they help me so that we can hold a debate and so that it is not just a Q and answer session. Rather, I would like to try to develop that. Okay, let's try to organize ourselves in a chronological order. Let's start then with Cecilia Paolini, who I believe now is at the Università degli Studi di Teramo. The title is the Queen of Spain, Isabella of Bourbon, and the Governor of Flanders,
Rodríguez the Elder, in support of the Spanish crown, ¿no? Así que para los que a lo mejor están un poco perdidos, aquí lo que se va es hablar de.
So we're going to be talking about relationships between Isabella of Bourbon and Isabel Clara Eugenia, who is the daughter of Philip II, who was the governor back then. Well, first the sovereign and then the governor in Flanders. To explain that clearly, Cecilia, you have the floor.
In 1623, 25 paintings left Flanders by order of the Queen of Spain. This group of artworks was intended to be exhibited in the flats of the Torre of Alcazar. The artworks were paid for by Queen Isabella of Bourbon, and the iconographic choice seems to have been determined in agreement with the Infanta Isabella in Brussels. It is, therefore, an all-female commission, a crossroads in the personal stories of the 2 very high dignitaries who played a fundamental role for the Spanish crown in the turbulent period of the 80 Years' War. The marriage of both was a consequence of an important state reason and decisive for the fate of the Hispanic kingdom. Isabella Clara Eugenia of Habsburg, daughter of Philip II, married her cousin, the 6th male child of Emperor Maximilian II in 1698. so that her father could entrust her with the government of the Catholic Netherlands. She was entrusted with the regency of the Netherlands together with the hair concert and held it exclusively after his death in 1621. Isabella of Bourbon, Madame Royale of the French crown, was destined at the age of 10 to marry the Prince of Asturias. She married the future King Philip IV in 1615. The marriage was planned by her mother, Maria de' Medici, at time widow and regent of the Kingdom of France, in place of her still young son, Louis XIII. As part of a complex strategy of pro-Hispanic alliances, the intermarriage between houses was twofold, as the Italian Queen of France married Louis XIII to the Infanta Anna, daughter of Philip III. From the paintings that the Queen of Spain acquired from Flanders in 1623, almost none were executed for this occasion. A large part of the acquisition was chosen from works that were already available in the painters' workshops, and at least of some paintings depicting the lives of the Archdukes of Flanders, probably in the collection of the court in Brussels. This choice, however, was not random or a purely aesthetic basis. On the contrary, it was dictated by a precise plan to glorify Spanish politics and the Flemish vassal territories. Interpreters of the refined as well strategic taste of the two dignitaries were Peter Paul Rubens, and the main painter and art advisor to the court in Brussels, and Jan Bruegel the Elder, who, unlike his colleague, was never an insider at the Flemish court, but received many commissions from the archdukes. Among the works of art that were acquired by Isabella of Bourbon, three groups can be directly linked to the two masters of the Antwerp school. The largest group consists of several scenes executed by Jan Bruegel the Elder in collaboration with other artists, depicting the lives of the Archdukes Albert and Isabella. This group of artworks, preserved at the Prado in Madrid, manifests the programmatic attitude of domestic policy that the two princes of Flanders pursued during their rule, rapprochement with the wealthy, popular, and bourgeois class in order to avert a potential revolt against the established power, in particular the Spanish crown, as had happened in the northern Netherlands. Not all of these paintings were executed at the request of the Vendrede court, but the two paintings depicting only Isabella of Habsburg are after the death of Albert VII. The Marymount estate is a significant due to its link between the Queen of Spain and the Princess of Flanders on the occasion of the commission in 1623. As a residence strongly connected with the Spanish female royal dignity, and because it was charged with regal values and that manifested Flanders belonging to the Spanish crown. Marymount owes its name to the foundress Maria of Hungary, sister of Charles V, who, like Isabella of Habsburg, ruled over the Netherlands after the death of her husband from 1525. Not only that, but the castle that dominates the landscape was built by the archdukes who entrusted the work to Wenceslas Koberger. But the architecture of the gardens was directly commissioned by the Infanta, who entrusted its realization to Pierre Le Poivre, whom she asked to evoke the gardens of Aranjuez, where she spent her childhood. In the scene depicting Infanta Isabella in front of Marymount Castle, there is a particularly significant iconographic detail. In front of the princess runs a herd of deer, emblematic of the royal dignity that links the government of flowers to the Spanish crown. In addition of these works, copies of the Allegory of Sign and Smell and the Allegory of Taste, Touch and Hearing, paintings that belonged to the Archdukes of Flanders, were also part of a lot purchased by Isabella of Bourbon. Between 1616 and 1618, Jan Bruegel the Elder involved a group of 11 other paintings in the execution of 2 paintings to be donated to the Princess of Brussels in order to fulfill a commission by the city of Antwerp. In 1623, the Queen of Spain commissioned a canvas replica of the 2 paintings. Today, we know their composition thanks to the versions that are still in Prado. These copies were made by Rubens' workshop, probably with the help of Jan Bruegel the Elder. According to Christy van Mulders, the pandan was a kind of business card to give to the refined and passionate collectors, the Archduke of Flanders, a sort of brief demonstration of the best brushes that the Flemish school could offer at the time. From this point of view, Rubens' introduction served as a certificate of prestige, a credible certification of the excellence made. In the Allegory of Sign and Smell, the details of the archducal portraits, based on Rubensian portraits, prototype, and the Habsburg eagle that appear on the candelabrum, a tribute to the archdukes, are very significant. More in general, these 2 works of art depicting the collection and natural wonders that belong to the archdukes. Therefore, the reproduction of their official portraits painted by Rubens emphasizes this entitlement. In the diptych of 5 senses, the specific references to the Infant Isabella are quite explicit. In the Allegory of Sign and Smell, the abundance of flowers, a synesthetic symbol that refers to the sense of sign for the astonishing variety of shapes and colors, but at the same time also to the sense of smell for the sense, it is also a reminder of our Archduchess' passion for growing flowering plants, to which she devoted herself from childhood. In a letter to Ercole Bianchi, Cardinal Federico Borromeo's art agent, Jan Bruegel the Elder, creator of the original diptych, stated that he had portrayed birds and flowers from life from those owned by the Serenissima Infanta. On the subject of flowers, note the symbolic significance of the co-presence, which seems to suggest an apparently incoherent classificatory intention of typically spring or summer flowers, such as iris, rose, and narcissus, together with, together with specifically winter buds, such as the snowdrop and calicanthus, and species that flower in odd seasons, such as the pansy and camellia. Under the Spanish crown, the ideal form of nature is realized regardless the alternation of the seasons, since the reference of prosperity reflects actual Iberian politics. As for the Allegory of Taste, Touch and Hearing in the background, one can clearly see the Mariemont estate, which the Infanta modeled to make it the Flemish twin of Aranjuez, a royal residence built in Spain by her father. The 1623 expedition included 3 works by Peter Paul Rubens with mythological themes, Ceres and Pan, Vertumno and Pomona, and Diana with her hunting companions. The 3 paintings were probably chosen from among the works already completed and available of Rubens' workshop. Diana with her hunting companions is stylistically later, whose pose is clearly taken from Artemis of Versailles. On 2 occasions, Rubens would have seen the antique sculpture, either during the journey that took him to Italy, during which he visited the royal residence in Fontainebleau, but the antique statue was in the Louvre at the time, or more likely, when he traveled to France to receive the commission for the cycle depicting the life of Maria de' Medici, at which time the Artemis was kept in Fontainebleau. of the second hypothesis were verifiable, the painting could not have been executed before 1622. So it would be possible to hypothesize its execution as a specific commission to be included among the purchases of the Queen of Spain. From a symbolic iconographic point of view, these three paintings are linked to the concept of abundance. Pomona, the goddess of fruits, fell in love with the god Vertumno, who presided over the changing of season. So their love represents prosperity governed by the balanced flow of time. Ceres, the goddess of her fertility, and Pan is the god of flocks and the breeder of bees. Diana, the Greek Artemis, is the ruler of nature and, above all, the dispenser of sovereignty. According to Diaz Padron, who has studied the 1623 purchase, all of these paintings were an expression of prosperity and pacification in the Flemish territories. This happy period, propagated through the iconographic choice of Rubens' works of art, had been created by the archdukes thanks to the Spanish crown, starting with the reign of Philip II, who granted the government of the southern Netherlands to his daughter Isabella through marriage to her cousin, a cadet of Habsburg Empire. Although paid for by Isabella of Bourbon, therefore, the painting that left Flanders in 1623 were the result of collaborative choice between the Queen of Spain and the Governor of Flanders, although there is no documentary evidence that the Infanta Isabella was the ordinatore. The iconographic of these three paintings is fundamental to understanding the roles that the two Isabellas played in the political dynamics between Spain and South Flanders. Ceres and Pan and Vertumno and Pomona represent two unions that guarantee prosperity in the world, just as the marriages of the two princesses ensured peace and good government. The Infanta allowed the Spanish crown to control the strategic territories of Flanders, which had already been reduced following the revolution that led to the formation of the Republic of the United Provinces in the north. Isabella of Bourbon, on the other hand, ensured the alliance with France. The allegorical reading of Diana with her hunting companions is even more emblematic. In Roman culture, Diana, the huntress, was the dispenser of sovereignty, and the Rex Nemorensis, a sovereign priest and predecessor of Roman monarchy, who resided by Lake Neme in Italy, was consecrated to Diana and chosen by her. The link between the goddess and the monarchical privilege linked to the role of queens justified Isabella Bourbon's choice of such an iconographic theme. Another joint iconographic program between the Spanish crown and the Flemish court was developed 5 years later, in 1628, when Rubens was called to the Spanish court for an important diplomatic mission to England. The aim was to negotiate with Charles Stuart to forge an Anglo-Spanish pact of understanding to stem the expansionist aim of French policy led by Cardinal Richelieu. The alliance with Spain, designed by Maria de' Medici, that brought her daughter Isabella to the Iberian throne, was disintegrated under the rule of the wrathful Louis XIII, who forced his mother into exile. The objectives of Isabella of Bourbon's marriage were soon thwarted. On the occasion of the diplomatic mission entrusted to Rubens, the Archduchess of Flanders presented 8 paintings by Rubens to her nephew Philip IV and his wife. Again, the paintings apparently do not seem to agree in terms of iconographic consistency or even period of execution. Many of these paintings were chosen from among those already executed and still available, as is now the practice even among the noblest collectors. The choice of the paintings was agreed with the Spanish court. Proof could be the information reported by Francisco Pacheco that in the month preceding the Antwerp painter's departure, a dense correspondence, unfortunately lost, existed between Rubens and Velázquez. The Infanta, therefore, did not define the choice, or at least this solution was agreed upon with the court in Madrid. But the iconographic themes, although not corresponding to a coherent program, are certainly not accidental. The Caledonian board, for example, represents the subversive force that generates chaos, so its slaughter, moreover decided by sovereign, namely Oinos of Caledon, is a symbol of re-established prosperity. Sati squeezing a bunch of grapes and nymphs with the cornucopia of abundance recall the concept of florality and pronostication because, moreover, the florilegium of fruits and flowers refers to allegorical compositions of the senses linked to the collecting taste of the archdukes. Diana hunting of the deer is directly linked to the monarchical privilege that allowed only the sovereign ranks to slaughter the animal, the very symbol of royal dignity. David, who, in order to protect his flock, confronts a ferocious bear, and Samson, who, in order to defend his parents, shoots down a hungry lion with his bare hands, are metaphors of good governance that confronts those who undermine established authority with strength and determination. By the way, Samson's iconographic is very similar to that of Hercules, who doesn't strike the lion but strangle it, a mythological attribute with which Philip IV often linked to adorned. Caio Muzio Scevola before Porsenna is full of political implication and underlies an episode in ancient history that exemplified the valor, courage, cunning, and sense of justice of the Roman people. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, finally, could have a connection with the hope for peace in Northern Europe, so much sought after by the Archduchess Isabella and the Spanish crown, in which Rubens was also directly involved during the 1628 journey. Moreover, these subjects only appear unrelated to each other at the first glance. Both in terms of subject matter and size, in fact, 6 of the 8 paintings are conceived as pendants. Caio Muzio Scevola before Porsenna and the reconciliation between Jacob and Esau seems indeed independent, but both are episodes of peace and recognition of dignity of the enemy, and explicit reference to the hope for the end of the war. In this sense, it's possible to read a figurative program. The 2 hunting scenes refer to the monarchical privilege restoring social order from chaos. Nymphs with the cornucopia of abundance and Sati squeezing a bunch of grapes are a symbol of prosperity generated by the court of Madrid. And representation of 2 biblical heroes, both forerunners of Christ, Samson strike the lions and David and the bear, recall the Catholic values of the House of Habsburg. The themes chosen for this diplomatic gift, therefore, correspond to the ideal of good governance and victorious monarchy shared between the crown of Madrid and the court in Brussels, formerly subject to Spain, yet made independent by it thanks to the government entrusted to the Infanta Isabella. The diplomatic journey of 1628 was also the occasion for the Flemish governor to commission portraits of the entire royal family, including Isabella of Bourbon, from Rubens. Her model, taken from life, remained in the Acid possession for the rest of this life. In conclusion, the Queen of Spain and the Governor of Flanders, of their commissions to the best Flemish painters, supported the political tune initiated by Philip II of consolidating the pro-Hispanic Catholic tradition. This was not based on the imposition of a strongly hierarchical aristocratic system, but on an assertive ability to bring the court model of life closer to the not noble population, particularly to the nascent, productive, and wealthy middle class. The canvases depicting daily life of the Flemish territories under the Spanish crown, executed for the Infanta Isabella by Jan Bruegel the Elder and both by Isabella of Bourbon in 1623, manifest this desire. Further proof of this desire is the quantity of replicas of Rubensian works that link the archducal taste to other art collections, both noble and bourgeois, both Flemish and foreign. Thank you for your attention. change the sound? Yes, but you can. Yes, yes.
Stay here, maybe I can help you a little bit with the debate if you have any problems understanding. Okay. Estamos ya, muy bien. Uy, está funcionando todo esto. Qué bien. Muchísimas gracias a Cecilia Paolini.
It's working. Yes, I'm so happy. Thank you. Cecilia, you are going to get an award because you just took the 20 minutes that I allocated to each one of you, and I'm very thankful for that. We're never going very well in terms of time. Our second presentation is going to be delivered by Álvaro Pascual Chenel from the University of Valladolid, who is going to be talking about Maria Anna of Austria and the arts, art, power, and propaganda. You have the floor. Thank you very much. First of all, and following the words of Professor Rodríguez Salgado, I agree with you when you say that we're historians. And even if we sometimes differentiate between historians and art historians, we're clearly the same, basically. And I see that when I discuss with my colleagues in this symposia, which are an opportunity to see them and share panels. Some others that I've met recently in some other congresses about Charles II, Professor Mitchell, that we share common interests. I'm going to tell you a couple of things now. I'm going to try to not take more than 20 minutes. I will actually not take more than 20 minutes. I have like 70 slides. I decided to eliminate many of them, but I'm just going to focus on some issues about the image of Maria Anna of Austria, but especially about something that Professor Mitchell and myself have been discussing quite long and at length, which is the possible study of the patronage exerted by Regent Queen, not only through her regency, but even until the very end of her days, something that we should also take into consideration. Tomorrow we will also discuss images, and I'm going to just focus on some individual aspects. I obviously want to thank the organizers of this symposium, especially Professor Noelia García Pérez from Murcia University, for inviting me to be part of this Congress. Well, we've heard Professor Mitchell's explanation of Queen Maria Anna of Austria. It was wonderful. She was clearly destined to play a key role in the monarchy, Hispanic monarchy of the Catholic Spain. This historiographic debate that we could hold here, but it's clearly well known that that role changed completely due to the death of in 1646 of Prince Balthasar Charles, her fiancé, and then marrying her uncle in view of the need to provide an heir to the monarchy. With this marriage, we find some of the first images which are not very well known about Maria Anna of Austria in double portraits with King Philip IV. And part of this talk or presentation is related to some things that are still under process, which is the study of the coins and numismatic of this time from the artistic point of view. Obviously, we sometimes forget. We study paintings and things that some people did not see in the territories, but coins were seen, especially the ones that were coined outside of Castilla, which is where we normally get the image of the king and queen, not in the Castilla one, because it's only the king. Because of the marriage, some of the first images, a stereotype maybe, but with a double portrait, together with Philip IV, the king. I brought several coins so that you can see them. After the death of Philip IV and Charles II going into the throne, even if he was only 4 years of age, but he was the monarch, and the will established the establishment of a regency. Miss Mariana, who changed decisively her status, legal, political, from consort queen to regent queen, tutor and curator of a child monarch, and she's in charge of communicating the noble, dukes, her cousins, and she signed me, the queen. This is a title that is going to appear in all types of documents, not only written, but also privileges and so on. And you can see it here that it legitimates, or projects rather, the legitimacy of her power. It was not necessary to legitimate it, obviously, because it was legitimated by the will of her husband, and that is constant. This entitlement, instead of Lord, it's the Queen. Instead of the King, it's the Queen. Traditionally, it used to say me the King, and now it says me the Queen. And that's the way she used to sign the documents. The circulation of these first images of the Regency entitled her as Miss Mariana de Austria. Spanish Reina Gobernatrix, it says, and in some coined silvers, she insists on that issue of the fact that she's the tutor of the King, Charles II, and that legitimates her. I'm not going to take too long in talking about some very well-known portraits, because tomorrow we're going to be talking about the building of some of this new official image of the Queen that was necessary to build from well-known models. It does not start from scratch, it's a tradition from, or an evolution from previous models, but there's some representative strategies about the regent queen and the king. Martínez del Mazo, with the figures of Venus at the bottom, equiparate the queen when she gets into Madrid with Venus. It is recurrent with the entry, and it is related to the treaties of that time when they talk about the regeneration and the generation and Venus and so on. One of the coins of Philip IV had the cosmos, or the representation of the zodiac. Somehow, it was symbolically linked to that deity, Venus, and that happened once and again. Obviously, the portraits of the Prado Museum, there's some examples when the Queen is signing the documents, and some of the paintings that are hanging on the famous Hall of the Mirrors. We actually know that that is not one of the halls where she had the meetings, but that was a representative power. Another model that I'm researching is the double portraiting. Something that with years I've realized that it's more frequent than what I initially thought, because in coins of Philip IV we've just seen that, but it is especially significant because of the needs, the representative needs with the Regency, or the queenship, and the circulation and dissemination of this type of images. She was the tutor, she was the curator, she was the gobernatrice in Charles II times and so on. And this is disseminated, coins, engravements and so on, that reproduce this image once and again. The repetition somehow insist on that idea. Some of the devotions, images that have been shown by Dr. Mitchell, the Toledo Cathedral, the Almudena Cathedral, so on, show different portraits of the Virgin And she's therefore appearing in coils, drawings, illustrations, and so on. Interestingly, there's some which are quite well known, but you can see here one where she's equiparating herself with the Catholic king and queen. The queen has the paper, the memorial, so to say, which is the typical image that I showed. We could talk about this image a lot. I'm investigating that also, I'm researching that, but I wanted to focus not so much on these well-known images, but on some especially interesting one, because it is right here in the Prado Museum, the drawings. Beyond the quality, the artistic, aesthetic quality, and so on, it is a drawing, an image which is very special for a queen of the Spanish monarchy, because it is represented on a horse. That's quite often the case, but not with the baton. Clearly, it has a lot of iconographic value. It is a piece of art. It's a historical document. Sometimes it's more eloquent than a written document, which tend to lie and not be very partial. We're not sure to what extent Queen Maria Anna was part of the building of her own image. Clearly, somehow she did. Could this be interpreted as a way of artistic patronage? Maybe, yes. I think so. Actually, because Queen Mother preferred or promoted some artists instead of others. Herrera Barnuevo, Carnillo and Binanda, obviously, but not Ricci, because he was the painter of Juan Jose of Austria. And therefore he suffered, Ricci, the Vicar violence, pardon me. And she was not part of the building, with the exception of the cases that Silvia Mitchell mentioned, for the entry of Toledo, for the court representing the kings and the king and queen, Maria Luisa de Orleans. This drawing is especially relevant, I was saying. Why? Because apart from the widow dressings that we know, she is really wearing the command staff. It is a propaganda, a political command office. It is the office, or rather the profession as a queen, the queenship, that she was having because her son could not exert that. One of the duties of her queenship, apart from justice, mercy, and so on, the armed defense of the kingdom and their indissolution. We can establish some parallelisms with some very well-known images of Philip IV that were hanging on the hall of the mirrors about this drawing, but especially important are the implications and the scope of this image. It is actually more important. This special feminine iconography has a meaning which somehow needs to be seen as a parallelism in terms of image, but also in terms of the political situation. The non-division of between history and art, with the figure of Maria Anna de Medici and the cycle of propagandistic paintings that they had commissioned Rubens between 1622 and 1624 in order to decorate the Luxembourg Palace in Paris. Let's remember that Maria de Medici, after the death of Louis XIII, until the majority of age of her son, became the regent of Queen Regent of France. This cycle, with an allegoric language, was destined to glorify the image of the queen, underlining the main facts of her life and her queenship, so that there is a project articulated, a program, where the legitimacy is affirmed of the power and her right to exert it, a very legitimate one, even if it could be contested at some points in time. In the case of Maria Anna of Austria. This cycle was well known and it had an important effect with engravings that we could imagine. Paintings could not be seen by everyone, but engravings, medals, coins, and so on circulated much more. Another iconographic source, quite clear, was this stamp of Pierre d'Arrête about the composition of Charles Le Brun from 1640, so that there was a precedent, an iconographic precedent, because it is previous. The size of the drawing, the big quality, indicates the possibility that we may think that it is a preparatory drawing for a canvas, but we don't have it. And in the list, there's no mention of this painting, but probably it was intended to have it. But we do not know whether eventually it was painted or not, although that was the case. As for the attributions, we're not going to talk about the details. This drawing has been going through different attributions. They were attributed to different painters. There was a relationship with Claudio Coelho, although there is no political coincidence, but that's precisely the difficulty. As the queenship advanced, the image of Maria Anna of Austria changed as a queen in power to regent queen, but with well-known models in the imaginary of the Austrians that allow for sure to follow the tradition of the iconography of the queen. Beyond the portraits, we do not know exactly up to now what is the direct artistic patronage task of the queen. One of the examples, the most early examples, is given by the biography of Alonso Cano, written by Palomino, where, after coming back to Madrid in 1657, he indicates that Maria Anna, when she learned that, and I'm quoting, Cano had not finished a crucifix of natural size, which is the one that is in the church of the convent of Montserrat of this court, she told Canon, until you do not finish the crucifixion, you're never going to be getting your salary returned. Palomino says, and we are not sure, that the carving or this tattoo was in Montserrat, and now it is in the Capuchino Church of Pamplona. The fact that this sculpture was taken to Montserrat Church sometime afterwards seems not to be just by chance, because Maria Anna was a very devout person of this advocation. Actually, we do know that she contributed with quite many other things apart from the sculpture, but also the alms and a lot of money. So we know that probably there's a relationship of patronage. For sure, the Church of the Hospital of the Aragoneses, another institution in Madrid, had been commissioned under the supervision of Melchor de Navarra, who was Vice-Chancellor of Aragon, who was a character very close to the Queen, because she was part of the Junta, the Junta de Gobierno, Government Board. With respect to Herrera de Barnuevo, we should not forget that Maria Anna had made a commission of a silver box dedicated to the Holy Week of the Alcázar Chapel. It died. It disappeared with the fire, but we have the drawing of the effigy of Herrera Barnuevo. Another example of the artistic patronage of the Queen, and I'm going to have to run because I'm running out of time, is the commission of several works to the Roman sculptor Juan Bautista Morelli, who was specialized in stucco and terracotta stucco. The artist was well known in Spain. He has sent several works via Velázquez that are, by the way, here in the Prado. Saint John the Baptist as a child, because of the will of the sculptor that was written down. We know that the sculptor had been working for some years at the commission of the Mother Queen in Aranjuez. Some of the ensembles that are most important, and you, Gloria, know about that, is the one that was discovered some years ago, is this ceiling or this vault of stucco by Lucas Giordano, and the dome contains some stuccos well known by Morel. We can also talk about San Antonio de los Portugueses Church that changed the advocation, and now it's called Antonio de los Alemanes. Luca Giordano was there, and so on. And I would like to finish with some of the issues that I talked about, which is the fantastic inventory of Maria Anna de Austria, the list I mentioned. It is preserved in the National Library. The transcription of the document that we have done in parallel, Professor Mitchell and myself, allows to establish or to maybe propose some identifications of possible works. This is the inventory of Useda's palace. As Professor Mitchell mentioned, the Queen resided there after she came back to the court. For sure, she had quite a lot of tapestries, part of the royal collection. They're part included in the inventory of tapestry. So they were used in the home of the Queen. You can see some excerpts of the inventory. There's some maybe this is an identification with the Roldana works. We know that she was a chamber sculptress, and it is sort of like an sculpture jewel box. We know the Queen has had quite a lot. It's not sure, but maybe it could be the work of the Madalena, which is in an individual collection, which is quite similar to the one that is held in the Spanish Society, appointing the Roldana as the chamber sculptress, and some recently attributed sculptures that probably also have to do with the Queen's commissions, Saint Joseph with the Jesus and the Madalena, Mary Magdalena. That gives us an idea of the interest on a sculpture of the Mother Queen. Actually, some of these sculptures were given as a gift to religious institutions. And finally, and I'm going to finish with this, one of the portraits that were included in the palace and that probably are identified. This is the Prado Museum storytelling of her dear daughter, Infanta Margarita, that was probably hanging at El Escorial with Maria Anna and her son Charles II and Philip IV. And that's all. Thank you very much. And good afternoon.
Muchas gracias, Álvaro, por ser tan puntual.
Thank you very much, Álvaro. Also, thank you for getting to the 20 minutes. She's still doing better than you in terms of time. And we're lucky because we've heard several things about this Queen. But we're going to talk about her tomorrow also. So I'm sure that there's going to be some comments or questions that we can leave for tomorrow, since we are going to be talking about several queens today. You were talking about medals, right? It was very interesting. I'd like to anticipate that the Noelia Garcia Perez, who never gets tired, is now working on a project for some years studying the medals of the women of the Austria House. Well, now we're going to go to the third presenter, Ezequiel Borgognoni. Ezequiel, actually, Borgognoni. Do we need to pronounce it? Maybe you will need to pronounce it yourself. Who is going to be talking about Maria Luisa of Orleans, the first wife of Charles II. I did not write the title of your presentation, but I think that's what you're going to be talking about, right? Isabella of Bourbon. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, before I start, I would like to express my gratitude to the authorities of the Prado Museum, to the staff of its Study Center, Paloma Málaga, Professor Noelia García Pérez, the moderator of our panel, Rodríguez Salgado, for inviting me this afternoon to share with everyone the latest research on a queen consort of the Hispanic monarchy, whose importance has gone unnoticed from the 17th century to the present day, and to whom historians have only begun to dedicate detailed studies in the last 10 years. I am referring to Queen Maria Luisa of Orleans, first wife of Charles II of Spain between 1679 and 1689, a woman who, I insist, until a few years ago, we knew almost only from the references that the Duke of Mara had made in a work he published about her in the 40s of the 20th century, and also from some works that had appeared in France during the 19th century, such as Madame Gay's biography and Bazin's biography, published in the first half of the 20th century. So now I will present to you some conclusions of an ongoing research that several historians of politics, in my case, but also historians of art and culture, have been doing of this character. The first thing to remember is the dynastic origins of Maria Luisa de Orleans, a fundamental and determining aspect in the logic of court society. She was born in Paris in 1662. She was only 4 months older than her future husband, Charles II, who was born in 1661. She was the firstborn daughter of Duke Philippe de Orleans, only brother of Louis XIV of France, and Duchess Henrietta Anne Stuart, sister of Charles II of England and daughter of the beheaded English King Charles I. Therefore, following the studies of Clarissa Kemble Orr and the model of queenship that we've been discussing, as defined by Núria Silleras, we're in a position to say that in modern Europe, Maria Luisa was a princess with an ostensible dynastic capital that was based on her blood ties with the royal houses of France and England. Her ascription to the French royal family is a fact that we should not lose sight of. Before becoming queen consort of Spain, Mary Louise was princess by blood of the French royal house. She was a legitimate male descendant of a French king. Remember that she was the granddaughter of Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, daughter of Philip, and niece of Louis XIV. In fact, one of the first representations of Mary Louise is found in this painting by Jean Nocret, a work from 1670 that shows her still as a child next to her father. This painting was commissioned by Philip of Orleans according to the taste of the time, where we can see 18 members of the royal family taking the form of Greco-Roman mythological deities. Duke Philip of Orleans appears seated and carrying a horn in his right hand. Next to him we can see Mary Louise dressed in blue, and on the other side of the girl we can see her mother, Henrietta Anne of Estuardo. The person who is seated next to Philip, representing a marine deity with a trident in her hand, is Henrietta Mary of France, Queen Consort of England, as wife of Charles I and mother of Henry Anne, the fourth grandmother of Mary Louise. Louis XIV appears with the attributes of Apollo, god of the sun, arts, harmony. The Duke of Orleans represents the start of the day, which announces the arrival of the sun, and the young Mary Louise appears as a zephyr. She is the representation of the fruitful wind that announces the arrival of spring. Mary Louise, Maria Luisa, goddess of the wind, in this painting wears butterfly wings and is crowned by many flowers. To understand the position of Mary Louise, please remember that her uncle, Louis XIV of France, is, along with the Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand III first and then Leopold, a key figure in understanding European international politics after the Peace of Westphalia and the Pyrenees. And in fact, it will remain so throughout the second half of the 17th century, coinciding with the reign of Charles II, prior queenship of his mother, until his death in 1715. From the beginning of his reign, Louis XIV showed a great interest for the Spanish territories, especially for those that bordered his frontiers and that were part of the old Duchy of Burgundy. I'm referring to the Netherlands, Luxembourg, or the French Comté. But it should also be noted that the French expansionism also reached the Italian territories of the Hispanic monarchy. The kingdoms of Naples and Sicily linked during the late Middle Ages to the Anjou family, and the Duchy of Milan, a strategically important territory over which the French monarchy claimed its dynastic rights. This explains that between 1665 and 1700, France and Spain fought 4 international wars, so deciphering the complexity of the Spanish-French relations and the role of Maria Luisa in this context is fundamental to understand not only the history of Spain, but the history of Europe in this period. In fact, the marriage between Mary Louise and Charles II was a consequence of the negotiations of Nijmegen, as Professor Mitchell reminded us, which put an end to the Dutch War, a conflict that had kept the royal houses of Spain and France at loggerheads for 6 years, which ended in the year 78. The marriage of the niece of Louis XIV and the Hispanic monarch, which took place a year later, 1679, symbolized just that, the re-establishment of peaceful relations between the two monarchies, an aspect that illustrates this French almanac that we can see on the screen and whose original is preserved in the National Library of France. At the end of 1679, in November, Mary Louise then arrived in Spain, and in January 1680, the 13th of January, she formally entered the Madrid court, where she remained as a queen consort of Charles II until the date of her death in February 1689. Let's keep in mind that we are talking about a very young queen. She died at the age of 26. Due to time constraints, I am unable to talk about the ceremonies that took place on the occasion of the Queen's accession to the court, or to take stock of her political and diplomatic influence, or even to comment on how she, Maria Luisa, became involved in the internal conflicts of her husband's court. To go deeper into these aspects, I suggest you consult the book by Maria Teresa Zapata Fernández de la Hoz, The Entry in the Court of Maria Luisa of Orleans, a work in which the author reconstructs the Queen's entry into the court. And already in relation to the political question, I have pointed out on screen one of my works, Propaganda Time, published this last year, in which I make a historiographic balance of and a review of the political figure of the Queen. But what I will talk about this afternoon for the purposes of this symposium is her artistic patronage and how this patronage exercise was by the Queen contributed to enriching the royal collection that went to the Prado Museum afterwards. 11 days after the death of the Queen, Don Joseph Pérez de Soto of the Council was commissioned as advisor to the Bureau of the Queen's royal household to carry out an inventory of Maria Luisa's property. Participating in the participation of the inventory and of the various acts of delivery that were drawn up over a period of 6 months, together with Pérez de Soto, were the senior chambermaid of the deceased Queen, widow Duchess of Albuquerque, Luis de Toledo Enrique, who had been the Queen's weekly butler, and an envoy of the Duke of Orleans. It is important to note that a good part of the Queen's possessions, mainly jewelry, had been bequeathed to her French family. This explains the presence of the French delegate that, together with the French ambassador François de Paz, had to ensure that the jewels reached France and Turin, where her sister, Duchess Anne-Marie, was residing. The analysis of this extensive document, which is mentioned by Ángel Aterido Fernández in his thesis and in the book derived from it, allows us to reach several conclusions. Initially, the inventory mentions the Queen's jewels. This is important because if we consult Mary Louise's will, we can see there that the Queen has instituted her husband as a universal head of her property and executor, but we also see that some of her jewels were bequeathed to different members of her family, both Spanish and French. And she also left some jewels to women on her royal house. On the screen you can see the detail, just to mention a few. In the first line, when she says to the Queen, my lady and mother, she is not referring to her biological mother, Enriqueta Ana, who had already died, but her mother-in-law, Maria Anna of Austria, to whom she leaves a garnish of turquoises. To her father, the Duke, she leaves an ornament of earrings of pearls. To her father's second wife, Elizabeth Charles of the Palatinate, to whom she also calls my lady and mother, she leaves some emerald earrings and so on. In the post-mortem inventories, the silverware is mentioned and some objects of daily use that were in the chamber and the chapel. In the oratory, it is mentioned, for instance, that the Queen possessed an image of the Virgin of Copacabana and several objects that the Queen had brought from France and that her father had given her. It also mentions the Queen's clothes, which are arranged in various chests, distributed in different categories, that were distributed amongst her maids and various convents after the death of the Queen. Finally, the paintings are mentioned in the room. The Queen's quarters after her death had been closed with a series of keys and padlocks, as indicated by court etiquette and ceremonial to be performed after the death of the Queen of Spain. These keys and padlocks were in custody of the Camarera Mayor, head of the chamber and guardian of the Queen's privacy. Therefore, on the occasion of the preparation of this inventory, for the first time, the most private sphere was included, where the last days of the Queen of Spain had been passed. What paintings were found there? The first painting mentioned in the inventory, annotated on February 28th, she died on the 12th of February, is a painting of Don Juan with a golden or gilded frame, a yard and a half high, that is doubtful of the Duke of Orleans, sent to the King of Our Lord or to the Queen Our Lady. And that's going to be a problem. Who is this sent to? Then, on April the 2nd, the inventory of the paintings, and this is a quote, that the Queen Our Lady had of her own. They found a picture gallery with 151 works located mostly in the Queen's room, and in which appeared portraits fundamentally in different members of her French family. The location of these paintings in the Queen's chamber tells us that they were not works that could be observed by everyone. They were not shown publicly, as was the case with the state portrait. Rather, the nature of these paintings was different. They were of a family affective nature. They were works that served as a consolation to the sovereign to make up for the emotional absences of her French family, and could only be observed by herself and by the small group of ladies and maids in her service, who were the only ones who could access her royal chamber. The Queen's collection was modest, only 151 paintings. Of these, more than 70%, that is to say 107 paintings, were small ones, some square, some others round. Following the fashion of the time, they decorated the Queen's dressing room. We must imagine a dressing room, a cabinet completely upholstered with 100 small family portraits, similar to the one her sister Ana Maria had in the Palazzo Reale in Turin. But we remember that these are paintings that are exhibited in an intimate private space. But then there were 20 half-length portraits of different royal persons, which were presided by a full-length portrait of Maria Louise. In this case, all of these works were located in the Ladies' Gallery. The queens did receive official visits in these chambers. There, for instance, she met with the wife of the French ambassador or with the Duchess of Infantado, who visited her frequently. Therefore, the portraits exhibited there did have a communicative function and served to communicate to the viewer the dynastic memory of the queen. The remaining portraits, 23, were distributed in the other rooms of the queen, where there were also portraits of the members of the House of Habsburg and some pieces by Titian, Giordano, and even some French painters. But these are paintings which belong to the king's collection. For instance, according to the queen's inventory, in the tower piece of the queen's quarters, there was Mignard's St. John the Baptist, which had been a gift from the Duke of Orleans, not to his daughter, but to Charles II. Thus, we can see that during the entire decade of the 1680s, the French royal family sent paintings not only to the queen, but also to the king, an aspect that Margarita de Alfonso Cafarena also confirms in her PhD thesis and other works. One of the queen's favorite portraits and also her father's protégé, Pierre Mignard, and therefore some of the works that made up the collection of Maria Luisa belong to him or his followers. Recently, Eduardo Puerto Mendoza has proposed that the paintings we see on the screen are some of the portraits linked to the Queen's dynasty that later became part of the royal collection. Perhaps these portraits, all of them, are of a similar size, 105 or 107 by 80 or 90 centimeters, would probably be those that were placed in the high dressing room of the Queen's chambers, a space that evoked the dynastic memory of Marie Louise. In them we can see represented Louise XIV of France, the Duchess of Savoy, her sister, the Princess Palatine, the second wife of her father, among other works that show all the members of the family of Marie Louise. But of all the portraits that belong to Marie Louise and which later passed to the royal collection and finally to the Prado, I am interested in highlighting the portraits of her parents. Very briefly, because I'm not doing very well in terms of time, right? Thank you. We have two oil paintings by the Duke of Orleans. In the first one, we can see Marie Louise's father wearing an outfit that combines the typical forms of courtly and military dress. Above the breastplate of the armor, exquisite lace can be seen. In addition, the Duke wears a long curly wig which covers the straps and probably an important part of the cuirass. The model is contained in the painting within an oval. Juan Luna argues that the work is probably a workshop replica in which the master Nocret may have had some minimal intervention, probably in the most difficult areas, such as the face. This portrait forms a pair with a canvas showing his first wife, Henrietta of England, of Stuart. Considering that Henrietta became Duchess of Orleans by virtue of her marriage in 1661 and that she died in 1670, the execution of his portrait and that of her husband must have taken place in 1660 or maybe 1665. In the painting, the Duchess wears a red suit and a blue cloak. Both garments are adorned with pearls, precious stones, and fleur-de-lis, embroidered in gold and silver. Like her husband, Henrietta wears a curly wig, very fashionable in France at the time. She appears with her little dog, Mimi. What was the fate of the collection after Maria Luisa, after the death of the sovereign? The collection of Maria Luisa after the death. The records of the deliveries do not show that Maria Luisa's French family received paintings, but only jewelry. The same can be said of the deliveries made to the women of her chamber, who received jewelry, silverware, and dresses, but never paintings. Therefore, it is most likely that practically all of them reverted to the king, her universal heir, and were therefore integrated to the royal collections to finally pass to the Prado Museum. In fact, many of them are mentioned in inventories of later monarchs. In spite of this, we cannot rule out the possibility that some paintings may have been lost in the fire of the Alcázar in 1734, or that they were subject to the vicissitudes of the French invasion in 1808, but we do not know for sure. Finally, to conclude, I want to make two comments. On the one hand, a list of bibliography references that you can consult yourself to read more in detail the ideas and contents that are included in two publications, all of them in indexed magazines or books published by prestigious Spanish and European publishers. And on the other hand, I would like to make a final brief reflection. At this point, I'm interested in highlighting how, through a conscious use of art, Queen Mary Louise of Orleans sought to preserve her cultural identity and create a space of autonomy in her husband's court. As I have shown in different works, the princesses of the modern age experienced in first person a process of metamorphosis and identity change that took place when they crossed the border and entered the court of their husbands. In 1679, Mary Louise left Paris and ceased to be the petite mademoiselle to move to Madrid and become the Queen of Spain. That is true. But it is also true that despite her new status and institutional position in the Hispanic monarchy, the Queen managed to be individualized, making her dynastic ascendancy clear to all. Art, in its broader sense, including painting, about which we have spoken today, but also fashion, music, theater, dance, gastronomy, was one of the ways through which the Queen conveyed her power, demonstrating in this way the commitment of royal women to dynasticism of Baroque Europe. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to Ezequiel Borgognoni. It was fascinating, and you also were very much focused on the time allotted to you. And now, last but not least, as they say in English, very important indeed. It's sure to be a very interesting presentation. So I give you Gloria Martínez Leiva. I'm sorry. Yes? Yes, Gloria Martínez Leiva, I was saying, who is going to talk about Queen Maria Anna of Neuburg and her paintings, specifically works contained here at the Prado Museum. And I have to tell you, actually, where are you now? Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. An independent researcher, isn't that wonderful? She doesn't depend on any institution. She can do as she will. That's fantastic. Congratulations. That is definitely something to celebrate. How free can you be? So, Gloria, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much for that presentation, and especially thank you very much for having invited me to participate in this international symposium with this extremely distinguished group of experts. We're learning so very much. And thank you, of course, perfect organization from the Prado Museum. Thank you to Javier Arnaldo. Thank you, Paloma Malaga-Shaw. Always, always wonderful to work with Paloma. She takes such good care of us. And thanks to all of your good selves for your reaction, for the interest. You definitely evince interest in these women in the establishment and creation of the Prado. Those of you who are with us in real life, those of you who are following us via streaming, thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk about Queen Maria Anna of Neuburg, and I'm going to talk about what she left behind, her collection, if you will. And the fact of the matter is that the possessions and interests of this queen is pretty well invisible right now in the museum. In the halls of the museum, we can only see two of the works that actually belong to her. A portrait of her husband, Charles II, this is Juan Carreño de Miranda, and Saint Barbara by Parmigianino, which decorated the Queen's quarters in the Alcazar in Madrid. And additionally, in order to know who she was, well, here's a portrait of the sovereign on horseback. This is Luca Giordano, and the small medallion, golden bronze, which was part of a special element that allows for the... Now, we have to remember that the factors are very scarce. The first thing to bear in mind is Maria Anna of Neuburg was not really a collector. She, of course, wanted works of art, but most of them were portraits or devotional images, so they were, if you will, utilitarian. She was not seeking artistic excellence. Another factor is that a part of her possession were left behind in Alcazar after she had to leave Madrid. She had to flee Madrid for Toledo in 1701, and she never recovered them. And thus some were lost also in the fire in 1734, and others, with the exception of a few portraits of relatives which have been directly linked with her, have never truly been identified as belonging to her. And finally, most of the works which did belong to her and which we now have access to were the ones that she left upon her death to her niece Elizabeth Farnese, who was her universal heir. But Elizabeth Farnese selected only 57 paintings from her aunt's collection, which included over 200. And among those selected, we basically have most of them, but they are divided among the museum, the Prado, there's 21, and the ones in National Heritage. But before we try to reconstruct these possessions, let's try to very briefly explain who she was in order to better understand her taste. She was born in 1667 in Düsseldorf, the capital of the Duchy of Berg and main city of the territories under the reign of Philip William of Neuburg, her father. The Palatinate was small and very densely populated. In this region, Catholicism had taken root, and it was basically the Jesuits that provided education. So it's not a particularly rich part of the country because the territories were attacked frequently by France. And thus the resources basically were consumed by the army and the rebuilding of destroyed and razed populations. So the artistic setting was very restricted. The 30 Years' War, the coming apart of the Hanseatic League, and new commercial routes which no longer crossed the center of Europe impoverished the empire. This economic crisis, which was also social and political and religious, explains that throughout the 17th century there was very little important artwork, but the decorative arts, especially gold work, were very important, as was music. In February 1689, after the passing of Marie Louise of Orleans, Charles II had to quickly decide and select a new wife in order to try to guarantee continuity to the throne of Spain. And the select was Maria Anna of Neuburg, sister-in-law of the Emperor Leopold I, and his mother, Isabella Amalia of Hesse-Darmstadt, who had been pregnant on 24 occasions and actually had 17 children that lived to a late life. Very fertile, and this was determinant. The limited artistic setting in which Marianne grew up explains that upon arriving, she did not want to collect as other queens had wanted to do. Isabella of Bourbon, Marie Louise of Orleans, Isabel Farnese, for instance, were very selective, but Marianne was receptive and she was interested in anything and everything that had to do with the arts. She appreciated works of art and sculpture. She enjoyed the theater, and she especially loved music and gold work and jewels, which she had enjoyed as a young girl. Upon arrival to Spain, we don't have any certainty that she had brought artwork, but it's possible that there were works in gold. What we see here, this casket was given by the Queen to the Collegiate Church of St. Mary of Corunna just 1 year after her arrival, and it contains the signature of Johann Sebastian Milius, a very well-known silversmith, goldsmith, who worked for the Palatinate. She reigned with Charles II for 10 years, and during these years she acquired a number of artistic possessions. She received paintings, sculptures, and other works. But we are going to focus especially now on the works included in the Prado Museum, so we're going to talk basically about the canvases. Now, as to where, well, she's going to ask her brother, John William, to send family portraits painted by his official court painter, Jan Frans van Doven. Maria Anna wanted a gallery of portraits that would allow her to keep her relatives in mind and would aggrandize her family. Between October 1690 and the spring of 1696, there was an ongoing correspondence regarding requests and deliveries of works for the gallery. We know that there were works in the Queen's Gallery in her main quarters, and also they decorated the so-called Long Hall in the Queen's summer quarters. It was after the passing of Charles II that up to 32 portraits were included in the inventories of the houses of Austria and Neuburg. We don't know exactly how many portraits John William sent to his sister, but it seems likely that it was about 17. We don't know who the sitters were, but we do know that after her hurried departure from the building in January 1701, Maria Anna could not take with her to Toledo all of the goods that belonged to her, and thus a goodly portion of her possessions remained in the building and became a part of the crowns. Many of these works were portraits of her relatives and also of Marie-Louise of Orleans, who inherited from Charles II. What we do know is that in the inventory of the Alcazar in 1734, nobody remembered who the portraits portrayed. And this happens, for instance, with a number of portraits of her nieces. The older sister, Leonor Magdalena, had married Emperor Leopold I, and so we know that the reference is made to 4 portraits, full body, of girls belonging to the emperor's family. We have researched, and Eduardo Porto Mendoza has recently identified within these collections in the Prado Museum a number of these portraits, the ones we see here. Mary Isabella of Austria, the older daughter of the empress who was to govern the Netherlands, Archduchess Mariana, future Queen of Portugal and mother of Barbara of Braganza, and a third girl, the Archduchess Mary Josephine. We see this from the National Photothèque. And another portrait of a girl plucking fruit, which was in the Prado collection at a given point in time, but which has currently been lost. And there were other portraits also, busts of her father, Philip William of Neuburg, her brother, Charles Philip, and her brother-in-law, Jacob Louis Sobieski, the heir to Poland, and the husband of Hedwig Elizabeth of Neuburg, one of her smaller sisters, all of them today in the Prado. Another series of portraits were sent directly to Maria Anna from different courts. So we see, for instance, the portrait of Isabella of Farnese as a child, and her sister Dorothy Sophie of Neuburg, Parma. And another portrait which has recently been identified of Isabel Farnese as a girl, perhaps sent directly to her by her sister, Dorothy Sophie, with whom she had a closer relationship. Another means is by commissioning painters to Luca Giordano, her favorite painter. He arrived in Spain in 1692 to decorate halls with alfrescoes, but thanks to his speed and skill, he also authored a number of different works. Maria Anna would also include other works such as these on glass, the Adoration of the Magi, the Adoration of Shepherds, or coppers, these wonderful 12 mythological scenes. The history of Psyche and Cupid, now part of the British collection, which she was especially fond of, and also on panel, The Dream of St. Joseph, the Holy Family, or this Saint Rosalia, which are in the Prado Museum and which we will be able to see. She especially liked works by the Neapolitan, and she had a good relationship with him. She frequently went to see him as he painted, and she actually gave him a very valuable pearl necklace for his wife. But most of these possessions are the result of an inheritance which she received after the passing of Charles II in November 1700. In his will, the sovereign said that Maria Anna was to receive all of the objects in the Queen's quarters in the Alcazar, as well as furniture and paintings in other royal sites which were not included in the crown. Also, those goods belonging to Charles II were to go to her, among them what the sovereign had received from his first wife, Mary Louise of Orleans. We as yet have not found any document that would give us a specific data regarding the number of works inherited by Maria Anna. A part of this legacy was destined to a religious foundation which the royal couple promoted after 1699 in a small Italian town called Chiusa, which is where the Queen's confessor had been born, Gabriel de Pontefessor. And there we see gold work, textiles, books, sculptures, paintings, and among them we would see the field altar of Charles II, a unique, exceptional piece which is a telling example of the refined achievements of royal workshops. Another part of the legacy was taken by the Queen when she was exiled to Toledo. She lived in the Alcazar. That was her new residence, but she had to leave for Bayonne in 1706 after having backed Archduke Charles, her nephew, in the War of Succession. Most of her goods remained in Toledo, and a goodly portion of them disappeared in the fire that destroyed the Alcazar by the Austrian troops in 1710. The rest of the works were put into storage, and it was not until 1740, when the Queen dies, that we actually access that inventory, and it is thanks to this document that we know what works were received from her husband, although it must be said that the descriptions are not very comprehensive. We know that there are works in the Prado Museum, and it's especially portraits, among them one of the best portraits of her husband by Juan Carreño Miranda in 1680, Father Cabanillas from the convent of St. Giles. This is Claudio Coelho. 1690, 1693, the Queen corresponded with Father Cabanillas when she lived in Bayonne, and a portrait of the Queen Mother Maria Anna of Austria as regent and governor, and which is in accordance with a model by Sebastian Herrera Barnovo. And there were other works as well. The Girl with a Coin, which was deemed to be by Murillo, and Two Still Lives, which are probably from the group that painted with Giuseppe Recco. But there are another two groups that we have to underscore. First, the works that were inherited by Charles II from Maria Louise Orleans. And this is a good case. Jesus and St. John hugging, Bernardo Luini, St. John the Baptist by Pierre Mignard, which was commissioned by Philip Orleans to give and present to Charles II, and which actually never moved from the Queen's quarters, and this garland with the Virgin and the Child by Daniel Segers and Cornelis Schutt. All of them are in the Prado Museum. There are others, such as the Virgin with the Rosary in the National Heritage Collection. Another small part of works that belong to the crown and which were by mistake taken from the Queen's quarters because they were in the quarters, decorating her quarters. So here we would see this Saint Barbara by Parmigianino, which after the inventory was taken in 1666 was described as being in the Alcazar in a hall. Eventually, in 1686, this work was transferred to the Queen's quarters when she moved to Toledo. It was taken together with other possessions. And this also happened with other paintings, 29, that were taken in 1696 to the Queen's quarters, which before decorated the cabinet in the Hall of Mirrors, which was a small hall beside this one. This, in 1696, received the cycle which refers to the Queen Mother Maria Anna of Austria, as we've heard from Dr. Leticia de Frutos, and these paintings were removed from the cabinet and moved to Maria Anna of Neuburg's quarters. For the most part, these were Flemish, they were decorative, basically garlands of flowers and landscapes, for instance, the Virgin and the Child surrounded by flowers and fruits by Rubens and Bruegel the Elder, and this small copper casket by Adam Alzheimer, which represents Ceres in Hecuba's home. They belong to the King's household, rather, but they remained there in the Alcazar after Marianne departed, and they were in fact included in the inventory. There we would see this garland, this landscape with a river, which were in the cabinet at a given point in time, but Marianne took them because they in fact had been inherited from Charles II. But the Queen would not only enjoy these works of art during her 10 years of marriage with Charles II, because she survived her husband for 40 years. 5 years would be spent in Toledo until her position in favor of Archduke Charles, her nephew, who pretended the War of Succession, had her exiled to France, to the small town of Bayonne. She lived there for 32 years, bereft of a pension, isolated, until she was able to lease quarters. And then in 1722, she was able to acquire a plot and had a palace built, the Palace of Marac. Among the very few works that Marianne took with her from Toledo to Bayonne, we would see some paintings, some that she especially cared for, the History of Psyche and Cupid by Giordano, which we would present to Antoine de Gramont, the owner of the Château Vieux, where she had lived for over 6 years. And in fact, when she left the Château Vieux, as I say, she presented the work to Antoine de Gramont. She also took with her some religious works, small format, these coppers of Franz Facken with scenes from the Passion of the Christ, with this panel attributed to Cristoforo Roncalli, Il Poverancio, Lamentation of Christ. But especially portraits that would allow her to keep in mind her beloved relatives, and that would remind all of her social position and lineage. She would take from Toledo some of the ones we've seen before, this Philip V by Hyacinth Rigaud, a version of the first official portrait of the monarch dressed in the Spanish style, and which possibly was gifted by the king when he visited Marianne in Toledo in August 1701. Others were sent from her relatives to Bayonne. For instance, a portrait of Dorothy Sophie of Neuburg, Duchess of Parma, which Isabel Farnese probably brought to her as she went to Spain on her way to becoming the second wife of Philip V, or her nephew, Clementina Sobiesko, daughter of James Louis Sobieski, Prince of Poland. She married in 1719 James III, the pretender to the English throne, and after the birth of her firstborn in 1720, she commissioned 3 portraits to Girolamo Pesci, a disciple of Francesco Trevisani. The portrait of James III was also sent to Marianne, but as happens often enough with other portraits that were selected by Isabella Farnesio, this was part of the estate proceedings and is now within the National Heritage Collection. So we have seen that there is not very much of Maria Anna of Neuburg's works in the Prado Museum. Not very much, but definitely varied in terms of genre and schools, and we see an important series of portraits of her family from the Italian, German, and Spanish schools. We understand that this is an important gallery. It's striking, however, that there is not one single portrait of the Queen, and this is because her niece, Isabel Farnese, did not keep the portrait of her aunt that was one of her possessions, and this was a work that was actually auctioned off. This was an injury to a queen whose imprint and legacy we wish to unveil. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias por
Thank you so very much indeed for this extremely interesting and well, such a sad story. This poor queen, what a sad ending. But now we have time for a debate. I think that it's going to be an interesting debate. Hopefully we'll be able to coordinate our questions and answers. So let me begin by saying something to all of you. What I'm going to say is that the title, the subject matter for this roundtable, as I said, it is Art, Politics, and Devotion at the Service of the House of Austria. Now that's quite a field. We can combine art, we can talk about politics, we can talk about devotion, everything at the service of the House of Austria. But what House of Austria are we talking about here? Now, I believe that we're talking about 4 wives, 4 queens who come to Spain. So we're talking about Austria, the Spanish House of Austria. So what we have with us are 4 women who come from abroad. 2 are French by birth. 1 is, I don't know, quote unquote, German, perhaps we could say. And another one is from the other branch, the Austrian branch of the House of Austria. So I think it would be interesting to see what your opinion is about the following subject. Up to what point are these women here at the service of the Spanish House of Austria? There's something which is fundamental. They're here to be delivered of babies, to give birth to an heir. I mean, that is the best possible service they can render to the House of Austria. You need to guarantee an heir. So that, I think, is a given, and that, I think, is something we all understand. But how else do you think there is evidence that they themselves, these women themselves, do you think they used art and devotion? Do you think they put that at the service of this House of Austria that they marry into? Or would you say that, well, maybe something's been mentioned, but up to what point do you think that these women want to continue to be at the service of their houses, their dynasties, their culture, and not necessarily place themselves at the service of this other court? Could we talk about this maybe? So could you perhaps delve into art or politics or devotion? Could we see examples? Could you say, yes, well, here we see that there is a desire by those who are counseling them, perhaps, that they make themselves available, that they place themselves at the service of the Spanish House of Austria? Or do you see that they want to continue to be at the service of their own dynasties? You see, so these women, there's always a problem in their lives. How to juggle that, how to coordinate, how to deal simultaneously with these 2 very important mandates. And also, I think it's very interesting, something which hasn't really been mentioned so far. 2 of these queens are actually not top-notch. We're talking about a niece here, and we're talking about who? Neuburg, excuse me, hello, what? Neuburg? And, you know, before, you see what I mean? We're talking about the leading European house. Why are they marrying? Well, obviously because it's difficult to find a suitable wife. A number of royal houses at this point are Protestants. I mean, you cannot be as free in your selection as you were before when everybody was Catholic. There is a limit. There are very few royal families that you can actually accept wives from. Now, this is something that needs to be taken into account. This is very important. This is something that we need to remember. They cannot choose whoever they want. I mean, that's just not part of it. I'm talking here a little bit so that you have time to collect your thoughts. It doesn't matter who wishes to. Yes, okay, very good. Yes, let me say before I forget, actually, that identity of interests, if you will, identity of dynastic interests, not necessarily Spanish, but more global. You have a clear example, Maria Anna of Austria. When she comes, I know what the goods are, the articles in her inventory, but she presents a silver cornucopia, a huge work, to the Cathedral of Santiago in 1683. Now, for a very long time, researchers, silversmith, historians and so on, have wanted to understand what it actually represents, because it's big and there was no agreement. But they thought about it, and they understood that the Battle of Kallenberg had taken place in 1683. And Maria Anna of Austria, much later, gives one of her works, which she apparently very much appreciated because it's a fantastic horn of plenty. It's a wonderful cornucopia. And she, as I say, presents it to the Cathedral of Santiago. The Battle of Kallenberg against the Turks. The Turks were threatening not only the borders, but it was the border of an idea of statehood. And in the case of Maria Anna of Austria, with Leopold and so on, they don't always agree, but there you have it. So this donation, which has nothing to do, I mean, the figures themselves have nothing to do with anything else. What's important is when is it given? It is a thanksgiving for that siege of the Turks on the eastern confines of the empire. Now, this was common in the empire. This is important in the empire, in Spain, in Castile. So perhaps we would need to think not only about the monarchy, we would have to think also about a broader concept, a broader identity. I don't know whether we can actually talk about a broader identity, at least, in devotional terms. It's St. James, it's Santiago, St. James. I mean, who better than St. James? I don't know. I'm thinking that this is a possibility. With the first idea that you're broaching, very difficult to respond to. I've always wondered who inspires this representation. Is it the queens themselves? Well, probably to a great degree, yes, but I'm sure there's an ideologue or a number of ideologues. I don't know. I've researched and I don't really know. I mean, who was there? It's good for this to be done this way. It's good now to be done that way with minor changes introduced. This is, I think, a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I do not have an answer. I think that at a given point in time, Queen Maria Anna of Neuburg does impose to send messages the way she's going to be represented. So when there are doubts as to her loyalty, when thinking about the succession, she is represented with a medallion which is not included in her inventory, with an imperial eagle which says, "I am beholden to the interests of the emperor." This is a very clear message, and this is a jewel which perhaps was sold to back the war in Barcelona at a very critical point in time, or perhaps she sold it in Bayonne when she did not have funds and she lived hand to mouth. She lived on the charity of others, or maybe it is a work which attempts to portray that fidelity, that loyalty to the Austrian cause. And then when the king is very sick, 1696, as Sylvia said, he was very, very sick. And at the end, he knows his end is near. She tries to protect him. She tries to shield him from the court. There's a series of portraits. One of them is in the Prado Museum. It's actually exhibited in the Spanish embassy in France. It belongs to Prado, but it's in the Spanish embassy in France. You've seen this portrait. The queen is there, and her hand rests on a dog, a little dog. It's a King Charles Spaniel. So what she is doing is she is directly saying, my fidelity, my loyalty, my care, my interest is King Charles II. I am faithful to my king. I am beholden to my king. I think that the portrait is intentional. And there's a terrible version, which is in a terrible condition in Munich, at 3/4. Again, the hand on the dog, which she sends to her family. So I think that it's not only the painter's wish, but she's actually specifying. She's giving an instruction. There's a message that she is relaying thanks to the portraits, and that's important. That's something that was important for her. She is very much there, guiding, if you will. Yes, I have to agree. When we talk about what we're seeing here, this double loyalty which these women have to respond to. Remember, these women have been brought up as princesses. They have been brought up ever since they were born. They have been instructed. They have been taught languages. They have been taught how to dance. They have been taught law and diplomacy. These are women who are very well brought up. The case of Maria Anna of Austria is extremely telling. These are women who are sophisticated, and there's a double fealty here. The family of origin and loyalty to their husband's family, the institutional elements, of course, and they receive instructions from the ambassador. So Marie Louise of Orleans, for instance, has a very fluid relationship with the French ambassadors who are received in Madrid in a permanent way, and there are problems here. There are consultations in the Council of State, and we see that, you know, the time is limited that the Queen can spend with the ambassador. So the ambassador sends his wife. Pierre de Villars sends his wife, and it is the wife of the ambassador who negotiates with the Queen. And then there's a little bit of a relationship there. So there are different strategies whereby these women can in fact intervene. Now, coming back to art, if we look at Marie Louise of Orleans and that state portrait, Garcia Hidalgo, Francisco Rizzi, we saw today that work on a number of occasions, we see that these are Spanish queens. The configuration of the image is completely Spanish. But when we look at some documents that I've been working with in the palace, what we see is that in their wardrobe, in their works, there were tailors and seamstresses, just Claude Breton, and we see that the Queen actually does have French garments, which she is not going to wear for a formal official portrait, which she's not going to wear when she receives the ambassadors, but they are there. And in her inventory, we see that she buys French nightwear. And we see that she gives Charles II a present of a tie made with a French textile, which Charles II wears in a portrait when he is wearing a coat of arms. So when we see these things that Gloria describes, that which we see in the representation, we have to have it in a conversation, you know, and the surprises are sometimes a little bit unpleasant, and which talk about the double fealty. So yes, of course, you're responding to what they need to respond to because they are mandated to do that, and that is it above and beyond anything else because they've been brought up to do so, but there is a certain degree of autonomy, and many of them are extremely elegant in their approach. And I mean, she is the niece of Louis XIV. Let's, you know, understand that as well.
Regarding the age of Isabella of Bourbon and Isabella Clara Eugenia of Habsburg, in my opinion, the most important point of view of the link between political strategy and art collection is the searching for the favor of the middle class, because the middle class was richer than noble class, not only for money, but also in point of view of the quantity of people in the complex strategy of the war. So the Queen of Spain and the governor of the Flanders aim to create a link between the middle class, and it's the first time in the history of art and society.
Mm-hmm. So if what they're aiming for is to emphasize the link between the prince and the middle class, what you're saying is that what she is privileging is in fact an internal message rather than necessarily serving the interests of the Spanish Habsburg. She's serving the interests of Flanders of the Low
Yes,
Country.
of course.
Okay. So,
Against the Republic of the United Provinces in the north.
yeah,
obviously.
and sometimes against the Spaniards.
Yes.
But anyway,
Okay, so if there are comments, perhaps, in this hall, if there is a comment which has to do with this line of conversation, would anyone like to make a comment regarding this specifically with a microphone, please? Let us know. Yes, no? Yes, there seems to be. Yes, I have a question for Professor Paolini about the works of art, the paintings. I can ask in English. Please continue. So my question then is, do we know where these works were actually exhibited? Because the message about the relationship of the queen with the people, in the case of the archdukes, that was very present because they themselves went to see them. But in the case of Isabella of Bourbon, I would like to know whether this specific exhibition of the paintings could perhaps be a conditioning element. Thank you very much.
No, in Madrid or whatever.
In the Torre Nueva of
And does that condition how they might have been interpreted? So there are two parts. Do we know where they are? And what does this tell us about what the message that they were sought to transmit
But
is?
the message is not to the people or the middle class, but a sort of confirmation to the Flemish government, from the Flemish government to the Queen of Spain, of the political strategy in Brussels against the Republic of the United Provinces of the North. So it's not for the message is not for the Spanish people, but between the governor of Flanders and the Queen of Spain, and the Queen and King of Spain. So the occasion of the art collection by Rubens and Jan Bruegel were in the Torre Nueva of Alcazar. So obviously the message is between the two courts, from Brussels to the Spanish court.
All right. If you allow me, I'm going to see if I can just streamline the questions. I have a question, and then I will be happy to give you the floor. But just a second, please. What we're going to do first is I'm going to pose my question, and then I'll give you the floor. Don't worry. This is a question which has come to us via remote. And thank you very much, by the way, for joining us via remote. We're delighted with all of our participants. And let me read it out then. Did consort queens actually exert an influence on their husbands in order to ensure that artists worked at their service? And could you perhaps give us examples? So the influence of these queens to include artists who were their favorites, include them in the court, and are there possible examples? Microphone, please. Juan Carreño Miranda, who was court painter, pintor de cámara, thanks to Anne of Austria. Herrera Barnuevo was a predilect of Maria Anna of Austria. Other painters, Ricci, for instance, was not in her favor because he had been the painter of her main enemy. So That was a solid reason. But I think that these are interesting examples, and I'm sure there are others. But it's not only artists from pictorial point of view. I mean, we're also, talking about garments, tailors, milliners, shoemakers. The textiles, the amount of money spent on textiles was absolutely incredible. The queens, the kings, the accounts, the numbers, or in theater, in everything that has to do with the arts. We're looking at architecture, painting, and so on, as if it were all about Vasari. But no, there's more. We talk about the decorative arts. I don't think that we should say the decorative arts, because the decorative arts were extremely, think about tapestries, for instance, or silver works. That's very important. There's a lot more, not that well known, and I'm sure that there are artists who were at the service of queens. This is an obvious case. Carreño de Miranda, well, his fame is thanks to Maria Anna of Austria. Luca Giordano, for instance, also. Yes, he was also a favorite of the kings. Yes, and we need also to bear in mind that these women are married abroad by proxy, so they arrive and they are queens upon arriving in Spain, and they travel with a cortege of many, many persons. In the case of Mary Louise of Orleans, it's about 150 persons who make up her retinue. 41 are musicians. Some of these persons, of course, join the court and become courtiers. A queen with a good relationship with her husband can definitely ensure that some of these persons join the queen's household, but it's difficult. It's difficult to do that in the court. It is not in Castile well received that suddenly the court be full of French confessors. That's very interesting, because yes, in fact, they do keep their confessors, all of them, I think. Mary Louise Orleans has a Jesuit, Father Airo, who will be her confessor for as long as she lives. Then they return to Paris. So they have these persons, and as Álvaro says, they are promoted, these persons are, and they become members of the circuits, if you will. And it's not exactly inventories. There are lists that have been prepared. Maria Luisa's travels have been listed and described. And there are 3 trunks that say capital T. They contain paintings. You're talking about how the paintings arrive in Spain. That capital T could be Juan Tier. He is a disciple of Pierre Mignard, who was a gentleman of Philip of Orleans, who travels with Marie Louise in 1779 and who remains in Spain. So some of the paintings that we've talked about may well have come to the country with the queen when she arrived here. And then you would have whatever she bought. And then you would have what her relatives would present to her, which are very clearly identified in the letters. I'm sending you this, and I'm sending you that. So it's that. There you go.
Yes, but in the case of Isabella of Bourbon, in 1623, there is not relationship between the queen and Rubens or Jan Bruegel the elder, because the choice is through Isabella Clara Eugenia. And in 1628, the only relation is the occasion of for the portraits, but the portraits are commissioned by Isabella Clara Eugenia. But these 2 events are all in all-female choice. So it's important in this point of view. The choice of the collection in 1623 and in 1628 were determined by female dignitaries.
Sí, en relación a lo que decías de los confesores.
Why don't you talk about what you were discussing? Yes, Mariana's confessor, Gabriele Pontificer, got such a lot of influence on the Queen, and the Queen got such a big influence on Charles II that they financed a religious institution in a little village, Gabriele Pontifice's birthplace. They got a monastery from scratch at that point in time. They were able to get the emperor to give permission because they wanted to do that construction in an area which was surrounded by woods where it was forbidden to cut the trees, and in order to build the monasteries, you had to cut the trees, and the Emperor Leopold said, okay, to cut the trees to build and warm the monastery. And when Charles II died, one of the parts that he got as an inheritance, he stayed there, and he stayed there. The monks in the 20th century, as it happens with many monasteries here, they did not have enough business or people to live in the monastery even, and then they went to another close by village, and they have divided that inheritance that they got by from Maria Anna of Neuburg. But really, at least Mariana got the influence when she changed her artistic taste, and she wanted to people notice that preference, so that her portraits are more symbolic. She's able to tell a French portrait painter to change the style, and that portrait painter paints Charles II. So she does have a lot of influence on the art that is being carried out at that point in time at the court. You have the floor over there.
I have a question which links art with your dynasty questions, the portrait family galleries. We have heard about the portrait gallery of Mariana, the Neuburg family. We have heard about Maria Luisa's French portrait family gallery. And the gallery of Neuburg was copied by the Empress sister in Vienna later. But there was no information if also Mariana de Austria or Isabella de Bourbon had a private family portrait gallery.
Can you repeat that final part? Sorry.
There was no information if Isabella de Bourbon or Mariana de Austria had a private portrait family gallery in the private rooms like later Mariana de Neuburg and Maria Louise d'Orléans.
Bueno, si he entendido bien, Isabel de Borbón tenía también una galería.
Elizabeth of Bourbon also had a dynastic gallery in her chambers. Actually, some of the portraits have got to us. And from Mariana of Austria, well, in the inventory, there's many portraits. I don't know if that is a dynastic gallery, because they're disseminated, so there is not a coherence, which is in terms of programs per se, a programmatic coherence, because apparently these inventories follow a scheme that you need to understand the labels, obviously, and who enters what, when, where. Apparently, it does not have a programmatic meaning per se.
But for Isabella, it would be more interesting to have.
I don't know. That's the answer.
I think, a question of whether there was actually a distinctive dynastic gallery or simply a collection which included a large number of portraits, of family portraits. And, I mean, you're quite right, they're the same family, well, they're two branches of the same family, but all of these families are related. I mean, you know, so in one sense, yes, it's one dynasty and lots of interconnections, complicated things. Voy a leer otra pregunta que se hizo.
I am going to read another question that was asked online. Were the consort queens independent in decision-taking related to the artistic patronage? This is related to the same topic, right?
In the case of Isabella of Bourbon, of course, it's absolutely independent in the choice of artistic collection, art collection. So it's the same. Yes.
Mariana también hasta cierto punto.
Mariana also, to a certain extent, at least in the last few years, which is when I believe she is more settled, when we can start seeing more clearly her personality, she takes her own decisions in terms of style and artistic patronage, as the case of Cusa. It's clear. She imposes something which is absolutely outside of the borders and in the middle of the mountains. Mariana of Austria, clearly, yes, she was the queen, but even afterwards, and Professor Mitchell, correct me if I'm wrong, even after being the mother queen, she still has a specific weight. And you said as Palas, that you, Professor Mitchell, are studying, it's a clear example of the clear determination of things to be done in a certain way. Actually, I didn't have time to talk about that as many other things, but there is even a portrait in 1666 of Charles II and Mariana of Austria, when Mariana of Austria, I mean, she didn't have to be in a double portrait of her and her son in a document that I'm investigating right now. So even in advanced periods of her life, she still, I believe, had an special weight in artistic issues. I'm convinced of that, yes. I don't want to introduce a long and boring conceptual discussion. I do not know whether the right term is independent. I do not know if independence is the right word or term. Did they have a margin of decision bigger depending on their institutional status? Obviously, Mariana of Austria is going to have more than our consort queens, obviously. It does not have to do with the gender, but rather with the legal status, so to say. It's not the same an honor queen than a regent and a widow queen and a consort queen that influences on the potential of taking decisions, but also the dynamic of the court at that point in time. That has an influence also. I mean, while Charles II was in kingdom, the lack of descendancy had a lot of influence on Mariana and Maria Luisa. Actually, when I see that Maria Luisa is more autonomic in taking decisions and interviewing and so on, and I don't want to use the term independence, is in the first few years, 1682, 83, when Medina Celi was destituted and he was replaced by Oropesa. It is true, Maria Luisa still managed some political issues, but when the heir arrives, the queen loses power. And if I think about Anna of Austria in France, she became a political weight type of person until she had a heir for 9 years afterwards, and then that is when she becomes a mother of the heir, the Delphine of France. That's when she's doing better and she has more power. Any more questions or comments?
No.
¿Y ahora? Muy bien. Retomando lo que habías
Going back to
mencionado
what you
al
mentioned
principio,
earlier,
y viendo este
Mia,
juego como el corazón partido entre
seeing that the
el
heart can be
país de
divided
origen y la
between
del
your
destino,
original court and your
primero,
destination
que
court, so to say, or your
ya
host
venían de
court.
ser hijas,
They,
seguramente, de una
the
princesa
queens, came
extranjera,
as
empotradas
probably
en una
daughters of a
corte entre
foreign
otras extranjeras,
princes
sin
that
cierta
had been
experiencia
embedded in
hasta
another court with
tampoco
other
plenamente siendo
foreign
parte nacional de otra corte,
princesses that were not
por
fully
tanto, ya han
embedded
creado.
in a court
Luego,
as a
estas
national.
mujeres que tienen
Now I
hermanas
have a question. These
en
women
Londres,
who
en
had
Turín,
sisters
en
in
París,
London,
además de la
Turin,
relación con la corte
Paris,
de
apart from
origen,
the relationship
funciona
with
a
the
veces
original
tanto
court,
más,
does it
menos,
work more or less
envíos, regalos,
in terms of
relaciones con hermanas o
remittances
hermanos
or
menores?
presents given to brothers and sisters that are in other courts?
Ahí, ahora sí. En mi caso, sí.
In my
De hecho,
case,
en este momento
yes.
estoy trabajando
Actually, right now, that's what I'm researching. I'm transcribing letters between Maria Luisa and Ana Maria, the Duchess of Savoy, her sister, and the exchange of information that the sisters have. For the time being, I can tell you that it's disappointing because they just talk about the weather and the health. It's boring. That's what happens when you find letters and you're enthusiastic, and I'm waiting for them to talk about politics, but no, I'm still missing some. Oh, you wanted gossip. Oh. But sometimes, yes. In the case of Maria Luisa, her letters with Ana Maria, her sister, are preserved, and there's some letters also with her mother, the second wife of the Duchess of Orleans. So it was quite frequent in the case I'm investigating. Mariana Foster with her brother, well, there's not much to say, and her daughter, obviously, yes. Actually, the portrait that we have here at El Prado, we know that that one was in a piece that was almost public, semi-public, a palace of a queen. You can call it public because it was quite a limited type of access, but it was hung in a place. Mercedes published it some time ago. It was hanged in a semi-public place that could be seen as, and as Silvia told us earlier, the dynastic rights of Margarita perdurated for many years. It did make sense, and the relationship with her brother, even if it was changing, it is clear. I don't know about other cases, though, honestly. In the case of Mariana, Juan Guillermo sends a lot of portraits of relatives and family for her main chamber and the smaller chamber also. And in that exchange of protocol and affection, Mariana instead sends her brother some other pieces. Actually, the legend starts there. Mariana expoliated the funds of the crown to send her to Juan Guillermo. Actually, from the crown, she only sent one painting by Rubens, which is the one that you, Cecilia, showed earlier. And the rest were just pieces that had been bought in places or that had been given to the queen or that she had bought via Enrique Weiser in the Madridian market. The unfinished work of the Caballero of Velázquez in the Pinacothek that she sent to her brother. So there is an exchange, yes. And Dorotea Sofia, her sister, she probably writes her that saying that she has founded the foundation Ecusa, and Dorotea sends a portrait of hers and a portrait of her brother to that foundation Ecusa. So in that exchange of correspondence, there's samples of that exchange of works of art as a way also of giving presents, because they're close. They have also diplomatic relationships, so, to a certain extent, but they're relatives, they're family. And it is not true that she expoliated the Alcázar, certainly not. She just sent one painting, and Charles II authorizes her to send it to her brother.
In the case of Isabella of Bourbon, of course not, because her brother forced their mother into exile, so evidently. And Maria de Medici, she saves thanks to Rubens, that conducted her at the court of Brussels. So.
Bueno, está muy bien acabar con reflexiones que nos recuerdan.
It is so nice to finish with reflections that remind us that all of these courts are international courts. Even if allow me to please use a term that might not be the best one, it is a culture which is common in the European courts, and all of them are growing in courts that have a specific culture, no doubt, but all of them are open to influences from other courts, and they're always in permanent contact, political, but also especially artistic-wise. I'm sure that so many other things that we could discuss, some of them we will discuss tomorrow, so please do participate tomorrow in the discussion also, in the Q&A tomorrow. I would like to thank the 4 panelists. Thank you. And I would also like to thank all of you who have participated here, but also online. Tomorrow we will be back. Noelia, do you want to close or give us some information that we might need? Thank you so much to all of us. Let's meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Please be very punctual because we have an even longer day than today. Thank you very much.